Yeah, welcome everyone. We're really excited to have you join us as we kick off the community partner conversations, starting with BCM. So Amy Jo, who's the Director of Partner Development and Engagement at BCM, who Molly and Heidi and I have had the joy of starting to get to know over the last few months, is joining us, and she's going to be sharing about the history of East Palo Alto, and really excited to learn from her today. She's lived in East Palo Alto and worked at BCM for about 20 years. So she's a lot to share with us. Thanks for being with us, Amy.
Great. Thank you, Cassie, and everyone else. Ian, are you sharing my presentation, or do you need me to?
Yeah. You want me to do it now?
Sure. Yeah, you can go ahead and put
Right.
it up. So yeah, well, thanks everyone for sticking around for Sunday morning part 2 today. It's fun to be with you all. And as always, to see some familiar faces at Vineyard. So I'm just going to be talking a little bit about East Palo Alto. And the reason that I want to share is I think as we are engaging in this partnership, ministry partnership, and just also as neighbors, context is really important and helpful. It's helpful in getting to know individuals, and it's also helpful in getting to know communities. As Cassie mentioned, I've both lived here in the East Palo Alto community and worked at Bayshore Christian Ministries for a little over 20 years now. So it's a place that I know and care about very deeply. We were mentioning a little bit earlier, my husband, Steve, who will be with you after service next week, he and I and our 2 daughters live here in the community. And a lot of my journey of as a Christian and of being here in this community has really been learning about justice and about diversity, about race and culture and racism. And a lot of that is specifically related to the history of the East Palo Alto community. And in particular, there are stories that I was not told growing up. And so part of what kind of, a charge that I feel like God has given me is to help share stories that I think are very important into helping all of us move forwards towards reconciliation. So I'm excited to share with you today. We'll leave a little time for question and response at the end. So hold any questions, or you can put them in the chat and I can come back to them later. Ian, I think we'll just go ahead and jump into the video. So this is a music video by an East Palo Alto artist, and it's just a few minutes long, and it's a good kind of introduction to get a good feel and visual for our community. And so listen well to the lyrics and think a little bit about what is it telling you about the joys and the struggles of our community. You could go ahead and play it, Ian.
From the Native American people, the Ohlone, to the village of Nairobi, to the restless souls of all my homies. This is not a song, it's a ceremony for the people of East Palo Alto. And please don't forget the East, cause we are a whole nother beast. Not that big, but it's alright, cause we got a lot of bite and we never hold back. Not everything that shines in the streets of my city is broken glass. We're stars with color and culture and a whole lot of heart fused with our music. Just listen to the cars and the homes and the churches. Yeah, we got a lot of spirit and we got a lot of soul. We got a lot of pride and we gotta let it show. Our demographic equals beautiful, humble peoples. En lo que a ti te falta, nosotros somos ricos. Comidas culturales por las calles traen aires calientitos. El clima es el mejor, conocemos lo bonito y también la violencia, pero no se compara para nada con nuestra potencia. A ceremony now, it's a wake-up call for y'all, my people of East Palo Alto, cause money and greed from over the bridge is buying us out of our homes, killing our hopes, steady we're busting the hope we made in 83 to become independent and free and run our own policy and own our own property. See, most of the people here are refugees. syndrome and poverty. And now, the same old thinking that labeled us ignorant, immigrant, primitive, limited, savage, and evil is still in our land and making it legal. Nah, that ain't cool with me. There's way too much impunity. How they can settle here, but we can hardly live in upper class communities. The same dang future.
Seguimos en la lucha, metiéndose los ricos, apenas nos ayuda se salen con la suya.
Nos ven como basura, empezando con las mentes de nuestras criaturas. Nos quieren sacar de nuestro hogar, como le siguen haciendo
This
en
is my home. Raise me up and watch me grow. This is my home. Where else can we go? This is my home. It's more than it may seem. Our hope is not for sale, and neither is our dream. This is my home.
You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Ian. So there are probably many emotional responses you had, throughout the music video that I shared, and I think it's a great way of kind of bringing to life a lot of what makes East Palo Alto, the things that are beautiful and also the things that are challenging. This video was made a few years ago, but it is still, I think, a powerful expression, and the things that they're sharing about are very relevant a few years later. Including people struggling with the issue of housing. So I'm going to jump into a few different topics that will kind of help shape a broader story, particularly through a justice lens for the East Palo Alto community. And again, I think as we move forward in this relationship as partners between Bayshore Christian Ministries and Vineyard Palo Alto, that hearing one another's stories, understanding dynamics and background and context is really helpful. And East Palo Alto has a fascinating, unique history. I'm not really a history person, but the many things that have happened in such a small town in a relatively short history are amazing, and I do think it inform how we interact and how we understand one another. And as Pastor Deborah was talking about letting justice flow down, it has not flowed down in East Palo Alto, and that's part of what I want to share about today. This is the speed version or the Cliff Notes version. I'll share a couple other resources in the chat later because you could talk for hours on a lot of these. This beautiful picture right here is San Francisquito Creek, which flows in front of John and Jen Rodriguez's house. I saw them here. It is the boundary between East Palo Alto and Palo Alto, and also between Santa Clara County and San Mateo County. So it goes past their house, comes under the freeway, and then comes out to the Baylands here. And it is part of the sort of justice story. This happened in the early 1900s where Palo Alto decided to move the creek bed and have it make a very sharp angled turn from the original creek bed to where it is now. And if you've ever walked around the Palo Alto airport or the golf course, that area, the Baylands, you've perhaps gone by this creek. And so two things were the result of that. One, flooding. And of course, like in many scenarios, the lower income community gets the short end of the stick. So the ways that when this creek has flooded in the past, it breaches the East Palo Alto side before it breaches the Palo Alto side, making flooding and homes being ruined and things like that. That's happened on our side of the creek and not on the Palo Alto side. They just did a massive sort of redo of the creek channel. They didn't move it, but they reinforced it. So things will hopefully be much better. We'll see in the next couple of days when there's actually rain. The other piece is that by moving the boundary between the cities and also the counties, Palo Alto was able to claim a large piece of land because it was now on their side of the creek, which is currently where the Palo Alto Golf Course and the airport is. So that land was claimed, and again, sort of, I guess it's a beautiful piece of baylands that, you know, originally would have been East Palo Alto, but is now Palo Alto. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So a question that, you know, you might ask is, why does East Palo Alto look so different than the rest of the peninsula? And that's because of a phenomenon called blockbusting that happened nationwide in the 1950s. Where East Palo Alto is now looked like the rest of the peninsula up until that point. It was, you know, suburban homes, mostly white people living there. And then at that point in time, again, this is, you know, when the civil rights is just beginning to pick up some speed. In the United States, African Americans were only allowed to purchase homes in very specific neighborhoods nationally, including in the Bay Area. And that time it was limited to San Francisco and to Oakland. And they decided they were going to open up a spot on the peninsula for African Americans to purchase homes. And East Palo Alto was the site that was selected for that. So they brought busloads of people in to look at this new area that had just opened up. At the same time, real estate agents went knocking door to door of the white homeowners in East Palo Alto saying, hey, a bunch of Black people are moving in. If you ever want to sell, here's my card. And essentially, blockbusting is using, you know, racism as a scare tactic to create change, and in particular for people to make money off of that fear. And so that's what happened. In a period of about 5 years, all the white people moved out, Black people moved in, and East Palo Alto became an almost all African-American community. And so it's an important piece of the history that it happened because of injustices in so many systems. Redlining had to do with home loans and was also part of kind of that era of kind of community home ownership, nationally speaking. And so that's how East Palo Alto became to be an African-American community initially, was through an unjust practice of blockbusting. Starting in the 80s, Latinos started moving into the community, specifically from Mexico and from a region called Michoacan. And over time, more and more Latino families have moved in. African-American families have slowly moved out. And so demographically today, the community is mostly Latinx with a small population of African-American and then Pacific Islanders, specifically Tongan and Samoan. You can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So some of you may have perhaps driven by. The sign is on University Avenue as you're heading out towards the bridge. Facebook owns this whole complex now called Menlo Park Labs. But in terms of kind of annexation of land, so on the Palo Alto side, the creek was moved in order for Palo Alto to annex land. This is sort of the one and only business park in the community, but it was annexed by the city of Menlo Park many decades ago. But just in terms of kind of looking at the community as a whole, and then what has been taken, again, the sort of natural resource and beauty of the Baylands, and then this huge business complex becoming part of Menlo Park, you know, all you have left is a very, you know, residential concentration, which makes it difficult for a city to sustain itself because cities are mostly funded by tax revenue. So businesses make money, and taxes from that go to fund a city. And so when you remove industry and business from a city, it makes it very difficult for it to be tenable from an economic standpoint. So the fact that the one business complex was annexed by Menlo Park is a significant economic factor for the city's health. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. And again, remember, this is the speed Cliff Notes version because I'm trying to give you lots of little bits here. Education. So this is Ravenswood High School here. Up until the early 1970s, there was a public high school in East Palo Alto, Ravenswood High School. And then as part of desegregating schools and challenges with that, they chose to close down the high school. And so since then, there has not been a comprehensive public high school in East Palo Alto. And that remains true until today. And so East Palo Alto students are bused to Sequoia Union High School District schools. They are now primarily assigned to Menlo Atherton, although that has not always been the case. We do have some other charter high schools and private high schools in the community now. But if any of you ever saw the old movie Dangerous Minds with Michelle Pfeiffer, that's about busing in East Palo Alto and features a whole bunch of students who were involved with BCM at the time. Not the actors, but the real individuals in the story. And so right now we have a K through 8 district called Ravenswood City School District. And like most school districts and low income communities of color, it is underperforming. Our students, sort of the average test scores for our K through 8 schools here in East Palo Alto, less than 20% of students are reading and doing math at or above grade level. So that means over 80% of students are not at or above grade level for reading, language arts, or for math. For a point of reference, for Palo Alto schools, it's an average of like 85% of students are at or above grade level. So it's essentially completely inverted. And we're talking about a mile difference between the two communities, but definitely a much greater gap when it comes to education. And this could be a 2-hour conversation, education in East Palo Alto, but I'll just leave it at that for now. Next slide. So you may have heard the term Belhaven, which is the neighborhood in Menlo Park that is on our East Palo Alto side of the freeway. And it's a really unique and a little bit bizarre situation. So the Belhaven neighborhood of Menlo Park is technically part of Menlo Park, but they're really not allowed to take part in many things as a Menlo Park resident. So if you live in that neighborhood, you go to East Palo Alto schools. You cannot go to Menlo Park schools. And also, if you want to play Little League, you cannot play in the Menlo Atherton Little League. You need to play in East Palo Alto Little League. And so there's all these other kind of lines that have been drawn that for all intents and purposes have made that neighborhood be included in kind of the East Palo Alto community, which is why oftentimes people will use a little more inclusive language. They'll say east of Bayshore or East Palo Alto community instead of the city proper, because we want to include that neighborhood. Organizations like BCM, sort of, we consider them part of, who we are here to serve. But it also creates some other complications. As East Palo Alto has matured as a city, there is funding available or programs available, but oftentimes those are restricted to City of East Palo Alto residents, which then the Belhaven community residents, which demographically, for all intents and purposes, they're same as East Palo Alto, but they are not eligible for anything that comes specifically through the City of East Palo Alto. So they're kind of in this weird spot where they're part of Menlo Park, but they can't really do a lot of Menlo Park stuff. But then they're also not technically part of East Palo Alto. So therefore, not able to take advantage of some city resources. Gentrification. This again could be a many-hour presentation. You can go next slide, Ian. So this has been a topic of conversation and is part of what the music video at the beginning was communicating, in that East Palo Alto is an amazing city, and there are so many people that are so passionate, that have such dedication, such heart, such care and concern for the community, have invested at political levels, at justice levels, dealing with housing, dealing with legal issues, dealing with education, dealing with issues of policing and criminal justice in the community. And many of those efforts have been successful, which then has created a more vibrant and thriving community as it has matured, including some development of bringing in more businesses and stores. But part of the issue is that as things improve through the hard work of all of these, community advocates over time, the cost of living goes up and the community becomes more attractive to outsiders who then move in, and the cost of living goes up. And then the very people that the community has been laboring for decades to try to, create this healthier community for can no longer afford to live there. And so are displaced and, move out often to Central Valley like Modesto, as well as, further east like Stockton and Tracy and places like that. And so that's a constant struggle. It's not unique or specific to East Palo Alto, but it is something that people feel very deeply. It's very difficult, I think, to have, so many people to have fought so hard for so many things, and you finally, you start to get there, and then, it's in some ways is kind of, taken away, or it's taken away from the people that it was, intended to be for. And so that's, I think, all these things are kind of part of the fiber, part of the narrative, part of the story of East Palo Alto. And I mean, East Palo Alto is an incredible, beautiful community. As I mentioned, there's so many people that, care very deeply and have chosen to, to sacrifice and to invest. The diversity in terms of, cultural diversity, racial and ethnic diversity in our community is fantastic. The way the community has come together in different ways. And as Christians, I mean, God is constantly doing so many beautiful things in East Palo Alto. And I mean, that's part of why I love being at Bayshore Christian Ministries, to get to witness that, and just living in this community in general. So I do hope that kind of these glimpses help, I think, illustrate the issues of justice that exist very locally, and between us as neighbors here on the peninsula. And that, as Pastor Deborah was kind of giving a challenge towards reconciliation, towards rebuilding, towards repairing, I think, that's something that we can do together as neighbors and as bridge builders of, maybe not getting the land back, but I think there are other ways that we can be part of restoring relationships that have been broken between East Palo Alto and the surrounding peninsula. And I'm very excited about, the partnership with Bayshore Christian Ministries and Vineyard, and I think the different ways that connections are being established, because proximity is becoming a popular Christian word these days in these circles. But I do think, being close to one another and getting to know one another, whether that's, volunteering as a tutor with a student, or interceding in prayer on behalf of someone, or, blessing someone through, material, financial means, like all of those are ways of drawing us together. And I think of helping mend the many things that have been broken, between our communities over time. And so I'm very excited and hopeful. And I think in particular, the fact that so many of you all at Vineyard are already connected to East Palo Alto or live in East Palo Alto, is an incredible resource, and gives me great hope for, what might be able to happen moving forward. So I'll go ahead and pause there. I'm going to put 2 more links in the chat. One is for a TechCrunch article. It's long, so it is an absolutely fantastic kind of history and overview of East Palo Alto. And then also the Peary Foundation did a short video, kind of just a viewpoint of East Palo Alto residents on things like gentrification, that I also recommend if you're interested in learning a little bit more. But I'm happy to spend a little time in question and response. I don't know if people want to unmute themselves or chat, either one of those are fine. So I'm going to go ahead and see if any questions come in from you all while I put these 2 links in here. So again, feel free to put questions in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself. And I know several of you have either volunteered at BCM or in East Palo Alto, or again, live here. So if there's anything you want to chime in and add, I'm totally cool with that. So.
Thank you, Amy, for this great history lesson. I don't come from California originally, and I always knew that 101 separated, East Palo Alto from Palo Alto, but it's really knowledge, and it's really eye-opening about how the creek was purposely diverted and everything. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and actually the creek is the boundary and not the freeway. And so there's a whole little section of East Palo Alto that is where the Four Seasons Hotel is, that little strip that's actually between the creek and the freeway. But the freeway is close to the boundary, so that's why a lot of people sort of see it, even though it's technically not true. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Any other questions, comments, anything you want to add?
You say that the business park was taken over in Menlo Park, but also Gloria was saying the freeway was pretty devastating as well, because that came through a commercial district.
Yes.
Known as Whiskey Gulch. So that also, the decision to lay 101 through the city had a big impact. And you can look over the top and see how streets are divided between east and west of the city. So,
Mhm.
and it was hard because it was a city that wasn't a city. Other things, they
Correct.
didn't become a city until 1983.
Mhm.
So being unincorporated, I think we didn't have a great voice.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
fascinating. That Crunch article is awesome.
It is. It is really great. Yeah, East Palo Alto did not become a city until 1983. So as Jen mentioned, many of the things that happened because the residents who lived here didn't have any control. It was just unincorporated county land at the time. Yeah, two great questions. In terms of maintaining low cost housing options, East Palo Alto has long had rent control. It happened much sooner for this community due to, again, the kind of strong advocacy. So that has helped protect affordable housing in our community more so than many other places. Although rent control only pertains if you stay in your unit. If you move out, then it can be reset at market rate. So it is helpful, although not perfect. And I mean, the peninsula being such a kind of prime real estate place, that has been a challenge. Another kind of there's a much longer story, but one property management company owns an incredible amount of the apartments and other rental properties. I think they own about 50% in the community as a whole and 90% in where all the apartments are in the strip between the freeway and the creek. So they have a lot of control. The current property management company has been relatively kind of friendly towards our community and maintaining the units and helping preserve some affordable units there, but that has not always been the case. So that's a bit tenuous back and forth. There's a question about COVID. Yes, the pressures of just economic pressures of families barely making it, living in, overcrowded housing situations, all that has been exacerbated. So a lot of the residents here in the service industry, so construction, restaurants, housekeeping, nannies, people who are very much affected by the original shelter in place and even now, reduced hours at work. And so the financial pressure, if it was possible for it to get more extreme, has. Most families are still trying to find a way to make it here because the jobs that do exist, many of them are still here in this area. But I would say just the stress, the anxiety has shot through the roof. And obviously having students trying to distance learn from home in, overcrowded housing situations. I mean, even people who love their families don't really want to all be together in a small space 24/7. But then you have, multiple generations and, you have a whole family that their living space is one bedroom that they rent in, someone else's home to have, your whole family be stuck. COVID numbers are terrible in East Palo Alto. The last count as of like 2 weeks ago, we were like 6 or 7 times Palo Alto's numbers. I think it's around 10% of the population per capita. And I mean, partly that's because so many people in our community go to work every day. So they're being exposed. Either they work in a medical care facility or, they're at a construction site or they're in a restaurant. Things like that. And then also with the housing situations, people can't isolate. I mean, some of the families at BCM that have been affected that have a little financial bandwidth. I mean, if someone in the family gets COVID, they have to go stay in a hotel, but that's expensive and challenging for a lot of our families. So COVID numbers are also very high.
Amy, could you comment? There was a question about local policies that we could be advocating for and how could be supportive.
Yeah. I mean, affordable housing always. I think that's not new, but it is definitely still true. And in particular, like a dynamic of affordable housing that I think is helpful as people are advocating and thinking and talking. So there's multiple levels of below market rate housing, and there's like below market rate, very below market rate, and extremely. I don't remember what the exact 3 ones are. But oftentimes, people are advocating in general, but kind of the just below market rate is oftentimes not affordable to a lot of residents of East Palo Alto. And so pushing for, the even kind of lower levels can be helpful to give voice to that, because often that gets kind of left out of the conversation. So yeah, housing remains to be a giant challenge. Yeah, I mean, so many things are COVID focused right now. It's a little bit more of a difficult question to answer, because a lot of people are focused on how can we get the community tested and how can we try to get COVID numbers down. But there are other things like we have a lot of immigrants, and including people without documentation. So that's always an ongoing concern for a lot of families. So I'd say those are a couple top ones. I mean, education advocacy, I'd say education and immigration, those are sort of, constants that are not given a lot of conversation currently because of the pandemic, but are certainly very important. And I don't know of any like current bills that people are trying to push through or things like that to comment on, but I can think, and if I think of some of those, I can happily share those with you. So I'm looking through some of the other questions here. Yes, some questions about other services. Yes, there's actually quite a few different organizations that provide educational support throughout East Palo Alto, and if it's helpful, I can definitely send some of those along to whoever would be interested. In order to get land back, no, East Palo Alto is never going to get land back from Palo Alto and Menlo Park. At this point, the efforts are trying to focus on preserving what's already there. And again, because it wasn't taken from the city itself, because that was unincorporated county land at the time, even though the community existed, it wasn't formally a city. A little fun fact, it was very contentious whether or not East Palo Alto should become a city, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And it was decided, I think, by a margin of 12 votes. So your vote counts. We all just voted though, so keep that in mind for next time.
Amy, actually, could you share a little bit about how Bayshore is responding to the pandemic and
Sure.
current needs of your community?
Yeah. So earlier on, starting in the spring and until the fall of 2020, we had a family assistance fund where we were taking in financial donations and then giving money to help families pay for rent or bills or grocery gift cards and things like that. Just helping with some of the practical needs, particularly in the beginning when a lot of people were not working or their hours were more significantly reduced. I mean, we've obviously had to make a lot of adaptations to running programs virtually, and that's ebbed and flowed. We are allowed to run in-person programming, and so part of BCM's strategy has been whenever it is safe and possible for us to provide in-person support, even if it's one-on-one tutoring or mentorship, we're trying to make that a priority because it's been a consistent and significantly expressed need from our families, even though people are concerned about COVID, some of the mental health concerns, educational concerns, and are also quite significant. Through support of Vineyard, we actually just launched a new program called Mindful Kids, which is kind of just supporting general social and emotional health for elementary students with a virtual program that's being led by a former teacher who's really excited to kind of leverage some of her experience in the classroom to provide more holistic support. So BCM has always been holistic, but we've definitely had our eye out for just, again, the social, emotional, and of course, spiritual, well-being of our students. But, we've always been concerned about the spiritual, but the kind of, an increased attention for some of those social, emotional needs because of the pressures people are experiencing in the pandemic. So I'd say those are some of the top ways. I mean, and continuing, all the things we've been doing before, but augmenting it with a few new things here and there. Yes, internet, as you all know, as you've been on Zoom calls and when things don't work, it's really frustrating. and imperfect. And there are organizations working on kind of tech accessibility, internet accessibility in the community. So that has been good. Yeah, there's a comment from Jeannie Cole about sort of representation. There's been a lack of representation from the East Palo Alto and Belhaven community in a lot of areas, whether that's on school board or particularly the Belhaven neighborhood being represented in Menlo Park has not been strong much at all. Yes to affordable housing. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of not in my backyard for sure. So, question about supporting students with virtual tutoring. So yeah, we're providing that in a few different ways through our elementary programs as well as through our teen programs. And I am going to chat you all. Oops. Make sure I don't send it just to the panelists.
We're all panelists now.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay. Just in case. I put in here the chat, Kim at bayshore.org. She is our current volunteer coordinator. And so we have, a variety of options in terms of volunteering at BCM. One thing that has been, I don't want to say good about COVID, but a way that God has been generous, volunteerism and giving has been up, which to me is just, I think, a testament to what it means to be a Christian, and for people near and far who want to express God's love, to be a blessing, to be generous, to be good neighbors, and so that's been really exciting. And so we've usually we sort of have volunteer opportunities for all of our programs all the time, but lately we found ourselves with, wow, we have all the volunteers we need, for this program, for this moment. So we would love to have you, if you're interested in volunteering, to go ahead and email Kim, and she can let you know what the status is, because it's constantly evolving as we shift programs, and volunteers are always, their schedules are changing and things like that. So that's really fantastic news, but also just because I can't guarantee that there's a perfect volunteer opportunity opening for you at this moment, but there likely will be one opening up soon as we continue to provide more support. So it's kind of weird as a nonprofit, because you're always recruiting volunteers and then suddenly God provides. Yeah, it's fantastic. Sorry, that's my dog barking at the mail truck. Yeah, any other questions, comments? John and Jen, thanks for all the stuff you put in the chat there.
So I'm curious about so how you said Facebook is present in the, I guess technically it's Menlo Park because it's that business park, but I wonder how you feel about, it seems like there are tech companies moving into East Palo Alto. Do you think that that is a net benefit because it brings in taxes, or a net problem because it raises house prices, encourages people to gentrify, that sort of thing?
That is a great question, Harry.
And what would you like the tech companies to do to benefit the city?
Yeah, it is very challenging, and I mean, if you surveyed East Palo Alto, you get a wide variety of responses, because it's true. The businesses coming in does create tax revenue, which is beneficial for the city, but it also creates other challenges, like the cost of living going up. Amazon coming into the community, they're one of the more recent large businesses. That was very contentious, because as Amazon as a business is not known for their, I don't know, giving back to the communities that they're a part of. So people were much less pleased with their presence in the community. Whereas Facebook is very mixed. Both Facebook proper and then the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan's kind of private foundation, they give a lot of money to the community. So I think people have a little bit of, it's a complicated relationship with Facebook in particular, where Facebook has been very generous and has, given a lot to the communities, which people appreciate. And you've had many different, been a part of, wanting to reach out to the community, wanting to, be part of, doing things that are helpful, but at the same time, their very presence, causes gentrification and things like that. So I don't think there's really a great answer, but I think certain types of businesses, ones that are interested in listening to the community, are interested in giving back, is definitely better than a business or a corporation that is just looking for a cheap place for real estate and doesn't at all care about the community. So I think somewhere in the middle, maybe someone who doesn't have quite so much, control and money as Facebook. I mean, because they're just a giant business with a lot of money and a lot of influence. So I think probably things that are a little bit smaller and that have some interest or care and concern in investing in the community that they're a part of would kind of be the sweet spot if there is such a thing. But it is definitely tricky. I don't know, any other East Palo Alto residents, did you want to comment? I'm only one opinion here. But yeah, that's a great question. And there's a few other bits in the chat there that you can read to add in.
I think maybe we should wrap up since it's getting towards 12:30. I think people get to lunch and other things. But there's, so much to continue learning about. And we also just wanted to let people know that with the liaisons and Amy, we've been talking about hosting another event that would be more extended and kind of get into more of the stories and personal experiences of some of the staff at BCM who've lived in EPA for a long time, or who've grown up in EPA, and just kind of hear more diverse perspectives on the city and how it's changed and how we can engage and partner with them. So stay tuned for more information on that.
Yeah. Do you mind if I pray for you all before we say farewell, Cassie?
Sure, that'd be great. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much on behalf of BCM for Vineyard support, for prayer, for Christmas gifts, for helping us launch new programs and getting our mailers out and so many things in between. So we've really appreciated your partnership. And I think that you made a lot of commitments when we entered into partnership, and we really feel like you've been living them out with your actions. And so that means a lot to me and to Bayshore Christian Ministries. So a huge thank you, and I'd be happy to pray for you all as we close up. God, thank you so much for today, for Vineyard, for the many relationships over the years between our two ministries, Lord, and thank you for this current iteration of partnership and ministry. And God, pray that we would encourage one another and that we'd be part of your good work, God, of doing justice, of reconciliation. And God, we acknowledge with Pastor Deborah that that's only possible through you and through the love we've received from you and the love that you've given us to share with others. And so pray as we move forward and continue to kind of work out our faith together and to love our neighbors well. Pray that you would guide us in this partnership and in all that we do in your name, Lord. And so we thank you for this time and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all. I put my email in the chat, so feel free to email me if you have any further questions. Email Kim if you want to volunteer, and appreciate you all. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy.
Really great to have you. All
You're
right,
welcome.
everyone, have a good
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Amy.